So be sure that we want to make sure that we are conveying proper information and that maybe things in the chat aren't confusing or maybe just misinterpreted. So again, we have some people that are monitoring chats to make sure that we stay on top of things. All right. So we want to know how many people are viewing today. We know who logged in and we can see individually, but we're going to pop up a quick poll and we want to see how many people are actually out there watching. Um, so if you could pop up, we're going to pop up a poll that's going to ask us how many people are viewing with you today, so we can get a good idea of the number of people that are out there. So while you guys are taking that poll, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. So our speaker is Doug Clark, and Doug is the Environmental Health and Safety Director for Jack Links. Doug has previously worked as the North American Regional Leader for EHS in Cargill's Animal Nutrition and Business, and he served as the Corporate EHS Director at other organizations. Doug has over 30 years experience in safety and safety management, and he's also a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. Thank you, Doug, very much for your service. If you want to find out more about Doug, you can go again out to the Stand Up website and read his full bio. So without further ado, I want to welcome Doug. I see you on screen already. And Doug, if you could go ahead and share your screen. And go ahead and let me see. I'm going to unmute you, Doug.
Got it. Okay.
Go and go ahead and share your screen.
All right. So before we get started with this, I just want to thank everyone for participating, taking time out of your day for this. It's easy to find reasons not to attend these type of sessions. But it says a lot for everybody that's on this call that you want to increase your skill sets around safety, not only for yourself, but others that you may work with. So thank you all for participating. Let me... Still, that's not working, is it?
Go ahead and start the slideshow at the bottom.
Yeah. There we go.
There we are. And thank you, Doug. And I will leave it to you.
All right. Again, like I said, thanks everyone. I appreciate your time and energy for joining us here. Currently, I do work for Jack Links, and this was the in-person part of this was gonna be in Mitchell, South Dakota. I have probably the largest beef jerky plant in the not maybe in the world, but certainly in the United States, is about 40 minutes, 50 minutes down the road from there, and it is our Alpena facility. So I spend a lot of time in Mitchell. That's usually where I stay when I'm visiting our Alpena location. So very familiar with the area, and very familiar with all of the ag that's in that area. When I worked for Cargill, it was something that I really enjoyed, was working with and around the ag folks. Tremendous people, tremendous work ethic, and some of this would work against them. We had a lot of people who grew up on farms or were still farming that were working at our animal nutrition plants. And a lot of times that can-do attitude that would actually work against them, because they wouldn't take the time or the energy or the effort or insight needed to protect themselves, because they're more interested in, hey, I got to get this done. So one of the things we're going to talk about today, we're talking about hands, and hands have always been a significant safety consideration anywhere I've worked. I started out working for Union Carbide. I worked at a shipyard for 5 years in San Francisco. I've worked semiconductor, I've worked facilities, I've worked chemical, agriculture, and now working for Jack Links. So a lot of different environment, but hands have always been something that I've had to focus on. I had to develop protection strategies around. And so I'm happy to go over some of the things that I've learned during all the time that I've spent trying to protect people from those type of injuries. All right, so you know what, Barb, my screen's got all of these there we go.
There you are.
You're
Yep,
good.
moving.
You're good.
Okay. Now all I need to do is get the stuff off of the screen in front of me that's blocking it. All right, well, I'll work through that. Anyway,
What's blocking you?
how many people are you viewing? Your
Yep.
host has spotlighted your video. I've got those dialog boxes that you said not to click on.
Go ahead and just minimize it, Doug.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
the negative button that should move it off your screen.
And
All
if
right.
your chat box is up, do the
Yep.
same.
All right, good. So anyway,
There we go. We love technology. We hate technology, but all
yeah,
yours,
right.
Doug.
Your hands have all kinds of components to them, very complex. There's tendons, muscles, bones, tissues, nerves. And it's amazing. We don't realize how important and how much we use things until we don't have them anymore, right? Until we've had an injury or something's occurred where we no longer can use it. I mean, you do everything with your hands. And unfortunately, that's the first part of you that touches a lot of things. In your daily tasks, it's your hands that has obviously more contact than anything else. And it's your hands that are doing the work, that are moving the equipment, that are subject to injury as we do our daily tasks. All right. Why am I not moving down, cats?
Instead of hitting the down arrow,
Yeah.
hit the right arrow, maybe on your
Yeah.
button.
None of those arrows are moving it, and neither the page up or the page down is moving it.
Wait, put your, okay, see where you
Okay.
see
There you go.
arrows
If
there?
I just click on it, it moved. All right, that's good. All right, so one of the ways to make this very easy to understand is a real simple exercise, and that's just tuck your hand in the palm. Your hand. Now think about, you don't even have to try, but try to tie your shoes without, your thumb. One of your 5 fingers. It's impossible, right? I'm sure given enough time, you could figure out how to do it, but without that opposable digit, you're unable to do most of what you do today with your hands. So every one of those digits is extremely important. Your thumb, probably the you know, the most important. So hand injuries, you know, while we go through this, I'll relate some, you know, issues or experiences I've had working with people working in and around on, you know, equipment to try to highlight the severity of these. But you know, some of the exposures we have is working with any machinery or equipment. You know, this guy on our right here is in a, looks like a conveyor belt type of situation, and has got his hand stuck in there. There's so many moving parts in things. Hazardous materials, right? So chemicals, you know, anything from solvents, cleaners, fertilizers, and, you know, hazardous materials, if you're not wearing the proper protection, definitely have a huge impact on your hands. Faulty or improperly used hand tools, you know, doesn't have to be on the job. I'm sure anyone who's on the call that's picked up a hammer or a wrench has had struck their hand with a hand tool or had power tool issues. Pinch points are all around us. Pinch points are one of the two, I think, most significant and most available unsafe conditions that are around us. And then probably the most significant thing is keeping your hands and fingers out of the line of fire. Don't put your hands or really any part of your body between a moving and a solid object. That's what we mean by line of fire. Don't put yourself in the line of fire in something that's moving. And back when I was working at Union Carbide, we came out with a think before you reach safety program. We were having a lot of hand safety issues, and the point, and it's still, you know, one of the biggest points is think about something before you reach your hand in there. Before you start doing something, think about what you're doing. And we're going to talk more about pinch points, line of fire, and think before you reach during this whole presentation. Employers have responsibilities under regulatory agencies, under OSHA, to provide a safe work environment and to conduct risk analysis and provide proper personal protective equipment to you and protect you. But what we're talking about today is really protecting yourself. No amount of administrative controls like a sign or a rule from OSHA is going to make you put on that pair of safety gloves when nobody's around, or thinking about what you're doing before you're doing it. It's up to everybody to protect themselves while they're on the job and off the job. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how to protect yourself. That's a classic example. Somebody had their hand in some pinch points and caught it in a roller, and that's the type of damage that we see on a all too common basis. When I was working at the shipyard, I had a maintenance guy up on the top of a portal crane, and we had gears that were maybe 5 feet tall that needed to be greased with a heavy grease. And he's up there with a paintbrush and having, while he's doing that, we need to jog that gear around so that he can get all of it greased. So he's working with somebody, he's telling the guy to jog the gear, and while the guy's jogging the gear, he's got his hand sitting next to it, by it, and he's on his haunches, and he slips a little bit, puts his hand out, and it goes into that pinch point of that gear, and the gear runs his hand through it, and then we had to back it out. Not thinking about where he was that much, not putting his hands out of the way, the what if, and not not having some of these here, the eyes on task, mind on task, fatigue, distractions, disregard for safety procedure. In this case, it was a balanced traction. This guy's in an unsafe kind of environment where it was easy to slip his hand. You had line of fire, rushing, complacency. Man, when I'm doing incident investigations when I've done them on hands, so many of these things are common. End of the shift, the distractions, the line of fire, the rushing, and I gotta hurry up and get this done. And then really not thinking the task through, eyes on task, mind on task, really important. I'm focusing on what I'm doing. In the last year, I've had 3 or 4 people that were moving heavy pieces of packaging equipment, like rolls of film, and going to set them down on something, and their hands were in the way, and all of a sudden there's a little bit of a bump or a slip, and the roll goes quicker, and they've had that hand in that pinch point. They weren't their mind wasn't on, okay, what if, thinking before I reach, and they crushed a digit. So all too common, putting your hand in the line of fire, putting your fingers in the line of fire, and not keeping your mind on what you're doing, and worrying about pinch points. Hand injuries, difficult to repair, loss of hand function, motion, dexterity, grip. I had a guy I worked with that was doing some tree trimming and put his hand in the line of fire, and the chainsaw cut into the webbing between his thumb and his index finger, and he never had complete use of that, those 2 digits. After that, he couldn't move them together. Happens in a minute. Not thinking, focusing on what he was doing, like what if. That what if question is something that I try to get people to ask themselves all the time. It goes along with the think before you reach. What if this slipped? What if this went through? My hand is right there in the line of fire. I need to move it out of the way. We talked about complacency. We get complacent doing the same thing all the time, and we haven't gotten hurt. So that's just how we roll now. And then all of a sudden, one thing is different. There's one slip, something weighs more than you thought it was going to weigh, or something doesn't have the resistance that you thought it was going to have. And, you have an injury. For anybody who's mechanicking, a socket wrench I'm sure everybody's had the knuckle buster where they have to put a ton of force on there to break a bolt, and you're not thinking about what's going to happen when that breaks loose. And what happens when that breaks loose is your hand is now in that line of fire between whatever piece of equipment it's going to hit. And you injure your hand and make it a hell of a lot harder to finish whatever that task was. So again, some of this is going to be redundant, but it's meant to be, right? Be aware of pinch points. Be aware of rotating or moving surfaces. The term is in-running nip. So two rotating surfaces that are moving in on each other would move your hand right into that. I was doing something on a call or on some sort of presentation recently where I think we were talking about lockout tagout, but a gentleman had a maintenance guy at a ski lift had gone underneath a tow line, like a moving escalator type of deal, to adjust something all the way at the end. And once he broke the object that was keeping the belt from moving, his hand was in the line of fire in that in-running nip, and it just dragged him in the rest of that way and killed him. When you've got motors running, gears, no, it doesn't matter how strong you are, you're not going to be able to stop it dragging you and pinching you in. So automated machinery, there's a lot of equipment out there that has that starts automatically. One of the things that at Jack Links that we're doing that's really, really good is we're adding a ton of robotics to our production lines. And that gets rid of horrible jobs that nobody wants to do, that are using just moving something all day long, and causes a lot of muscular skeletal cumulative trauma type of issue to sore hands, tendons, forearms, etc. But one of the consequences of having that robotic equipment is, to me, it's the biggest risk, maybe next to forklifts and human interaction, that we have in our plants, because robots, typically hydraulically actuated, aren't going to slow down or stop for anybody that gets in the way, and they start and stop automatically. And people entering into that robotic envelope without having locked out the equipment is one of the things that keeps me up at night. We put a ton of controls in place. There's interlocks. You've got lockout tagout requirements, engineering controls that we have in there. But if somebody wants to walk off the edge of a roof, they can walk off. And if somebody wants to bypass all of that safety stuff, the interlocks and the not follow lockout tagout, they can. And if you're in a robotic envelope with automatic machinery, good chance of significant injury or fatality occurring. Loose clothing or jewelry, also you all heard of somebody's hood or smock or something getting caught and pulling them in on a production floor, and I'm thinking grain silos and all of the conveyors and things we have around those, man, there's a ton of that. And a lot of times that's not guarded very well. PTOs, we do a lot of work around PTO safety with the grain handling safety. Um, it is such a horrific accident waiting to happen. And all through our work environment, there's things similar to PTOs. So things getting caught in moving machines. All right. So lines of defense, like layers of defense, when we talk about risk and we've identified risk, what layers of defense can we put in place to reduce that risk to an acceptable level and to keep our people safe? Well, the hierarchy of controls is really what we use. And the hierarchy of controls, the first type of control that we want to use, the strongest control, is eliminating the hazard. Right? So I'll give you an example. You've got a ladder that somebody has to use to go up to the roof, and ladders are inherently unsafe. We replace that ladder with stairs with the rail on them. I've eliminated that hazard. I had plants at Cargill that, would worked hard at and accomplished eliminating all ladders in the plant. We went to all stairs. So that's what I mean by elimination. And then, the second thing is, can we change it out with something that's safer? So back to the ladder analogy, maybe I can find a better type of ladder or system to move from one place to the other. So can I make it less, I still have to have something, but can I make it safer? A lot of times with chemicals, we change out a stronger chemical with something that's a safer type of chemical, like going from a solvent that's flammable to a citrus type of safety solvent. Yeah, it might not work as good, but it's so much safer in so many ways. And then once we do those, the next one is engineering controls. So we put controls in place so that you can't get to that hazard. An engineering control would be guarding. So yeah, the hazard is still there, but now we've guarded to where you can't get to it. Then administrative controls, we start getting into really weak controls. Putting a sign up, that says caution in running NIP. Or caution, be more safe, right? Now we're requiring the human element to pay attention to what that sign said and follow it. People make mistakes every day, right? So when we get down to the human element, mistakes are going to happen. And then if you failed at all of that, PPE is the last layer of defense. All too often, PPE is the first layer of defense, and it shouldn't be that way. We want what you're doing to be safe, so you don't have to put on those cut-proof gloves. You don't have to put on rubber gloves for the type of solvent you're using. Now we know that's not always practical, right? So we do end up using PPE to protect us from all kinds of hazards. And a lot of these just present every once in a while, so engineering controls aren't always available. But PPE should never be the first thing you think about when you're doing a risk assessment. Okay, what kind of PPE can I use to protect against that? That should be the last thing. Okay, I wasn't able to do any of the others, so now let's look at PPE. A lot of tools out there. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these, but I do want to talk about a few of these that are really common when we're doing accident investigations, probably everybody either did it themselves or knows somebody that we're using a screwdriver for one, not what it was intended for, or had to apply a ton of force on the screwdriver so that they could break a frozen screw. And same type of thing, when that breaks free or slides, do I have myself in the line of fire? All too common, the answer is yes, I do have myself in the line of fire. The way I'm pressing into it, I have my left hand is behind whatever I'm pressing into, and when that screwdriver slips, man, it goes right into that hand. Not so I am not looking at line of fire. I'm not thinking, what if this thing slips and my hand goes in there. I'm not focusing on the risk that I'm creating myself and the position that I'm putting myself into. There's 100 different ways to deal with that screw. I can cut the end off. I can put break free a solution on there and let it sit. I can try easy out. I can try all kinds of things. Putting that ton of pressure on there is probably not one that probably shouldn't be my first one. And there's ways to do that and ways not to do that. So it's, again, goes on that think before you reach, think about what you're doing. Knives are another one. Man, sharp objects have always been something that I've had consistently to deal with. Couple of different issues with these are one, people's own personal knife. And in ag, that's probably the number one thing that we're using is our own pocket knife, our own knife that we carry, because of what you do, you use it all day long. They get dull. We have to put more pressure on them to do what we want to. We're using them incorrectly. So like this guy who's doing the fancy whittling there, at least he's moving away from himself. So his right hand isn't in the line of fire. How many times, especially with younger workers or younger people, period, do you see them moving something into them, right? Having a knife or a sharps of any kind, and they're pulling it towards their body to try to complete the task instead of moving it away from them. Those box cutters, sheetrock knives type of thing that we have here, constant misconception about them being safety knife if the blade retracts with a spring. That's not really any more safe than the ones that don't, because when you're using those, your thumb is on that and it's keeping that blade exposed the entire time it's in your hand. So the only thing that spring does is when you're done with it, you put it down, the blade retracts. The true safety cutter is the minute that the tension between what you're cutting and the knife is broken, they automatically retract. Those are actual safety knives. So we see these all the time where somebody's using those to cut a bag open or a box, and they're cutting into themselves, or they're putting themselves in the line of fire. The blades are dull, so it requires excessive force. There's a ton of options that are much safer where the knife blade isn't exposed. There's plenty of different options. It's just a matter of spending a little bit of time and getting them, and then making sure they work. If you're in a employer supervisor type of a situation, this has been always been an issue where we'll talk about in a plant, we'll talk about the knife safety, and maybe we'll do a hazard assessment and see what's out there. And then, okay, for these people that are opening bags, we'll get that kind of shepherd's hook, that J hook where the blade is not exposed. And so we've really we've eliminated that hazard with an engineering control. So you think everything's good, and job done. I'll move on to the next one. Well, anytime we do an intervention in the work environment, if you don't follow back up and see if that's still having the desired effect that you thought it was going to, you're kidding yourself. All too often, management will come up with something, put it out, and think they've corrected the situation, and without going back and checking and finding out, yeah, you gave us these, but they don't cut after the first day. They stop and they get hung up, or they get loaded with junk and they don't work. So we quit using those. A couple days after you gave them, we went back to what we were doing before. So when we're doing these kind of interventions as an employer or a supervisor, we got to make sure that they're having the desired results. Otherwise, people are going to go back to what they were doing. People will always use the easiest way. Well, why would somebody do that? Well, because it was easier. It was easier and it was faster. Easy and faster wins out every time over safer and harder. That's why when we're trying to put a safe, we're reducing risk, it has to be easy to do. It has to be sustainable. If it's not easy to do, and if it's not a sustainable plan, then it's not going to last. If I make something hard to do, nobody's going to do it. When I'm not watching, nobody's going to follow that. So you want to make it easy to do the right thing. Hammers, pretty self-explanatory. When you're putting your hand to hold that nail, or to hold those two pieces of whatever in place as you're hitting it, you put your hand in a line of fire. And people make mistakes. You're not going to repeat that stroke exactly the same every time, especially as you get more fatigued. I did a greenfield project in Michigan. We built a new feed mill, and I had one recordable injury for that whole project, and it was one of the formers for the concrete pour. When they were building the forms, with the hammer, whomped his thumb and needed some stitches to close it up. So the other thing is, we use these hammers incorrectly all the time, right? We don't have the right sized hammer. We have an old hammer, right tool for the right job. All this stuff's really easy to say, but if I'm at a home farm, if I'm in a silo, if I'm doing something out in the field, I use whatever's there because I don't have an option, right? It's either do it with this or don't do it. And that's where we then have to protect ourselves, right? So, okay, I've got to use this to hit this. How can I do this safely? Just think a little bit before you do it. Protect yourself. Chisels. So here's a really cool tool. I don't think I've ever seen anybody use it, but this kind of stuff is out there, right? It keeps your hand out of the line of fire. It's easier to position that chisel wherever you need it to be. Great safety option. I don't know if anybody on the call's seen that used, but I never have. That's the trouble with a lot of these safety options is they never get out in the field. They never get where they need to be. Wrenches, man, always an issue, right? Crappy wrenches or wrong side. I was in at our Alpena plant a couple weeks ago, and I had 3 issues in the course of the week that I was there with spanner wrenches, with team members using the wrong spanner wrench because they didn't have the right size there with them, and either slipping because it was the wrong size and busting a knuckle, or applying way too much force because they didn't have the one that they were using didn't have a long enough bar on there, and so they had to use extra force to try to break that connection. And then, of course, when they finally break it, then their hands go down and they hit whatever whatever piece of the equipment is in their line of fire. You again thinking about what you're doing before you're doing it. Has never used a cheater bar and a wrench. Would I use a cheater bar on a wrench or jump on it? Right, I'd probably use the cheater bar, which is, you know, a piece of pipe that you put on over there. Ideally, you'd get the right size wrench, but you know, that may not be available. So even though that's not that from a safety standpoint, you know, you're more at risk. Yeah, but you may be putting yourself away from the line of fire. So, you know, just think about what you're doing for a minute. I know there's been programs out there like Take a Minute for Safety, and it's just think about what you're doing before you do it. Portable power tools. Just awesome. I was watching an old video the other day when they were making Disneyland, and all these carpenters there using all these hand tools like a brace and bit and hammer and nails and everything else. And nowadays, that type of job would have nothing but a million battery operated tools that would be, you know, using screws and are so much safer. But you know, we still have risks with power tools. We still have, you know, when we're working with larger drills, right, where it can bind up and flip your hand around and break a wrist or sprain a wrist. Anti-vibration. When I worked at the shipyard, that was a huge deal. We had these rubber anti-vibrating gloves because a lot of the stuff we did was working around vibrating tools. The electrical component. Now, most of these are batteries, right? Like who uses a corded drill anymore? Who uses, like I've got my worm drive skill saw, and I maybe use that 2 or 3 times a year as opposed to the battery ones. But you know, all of those have a risk to using them. You just want to again think about what that risk is before you use it. Think about the line of fire, the putting your hand in front of the power tool that you're moving into it to hold the you know, board in place instead of using a clamp on it. Gloves, notorious for getting caught in rotating power equipment. So while typically we always want to be wearing some sort of hand protection, even if it's just, you know, a leather work glove, well-fitting, or all of the cool mechanics gloves that are out there now, if there's a lot of a slop to it, or the gauntlet has a lot of loose parts to it, you know, that can be the unintended consequence can be that catches and gets tied up and caught up in the drill. I mean, there's you know, everything we do has a risk to it. We just want to reduce it to an acceptable level. Shop tools. And I was just talking to somebody the other day who was telling me a friend of theirs had the board kicked back on a table saw there, like the one on the right, where they got about halfway through and it kicked back. I mean, that's if you're not expecting that, you've never used that piece of equipment before. But you've got a lot of new people in the workplace constantly that maybe don't have that cognitive bias the injuries that can be associated with using that, and they don't take the required safety precautions that somebody who's been around it for a while does. That's something that I believe real strongly in, in the work environment or not work environment. You are your brother's keeper. You have a responsibility to try to protect people that are around you. When you see them doing something unsafe, taking a minute to let them know why that's inherently unsafe, is something that we should all be doing. A lot of times the person just doesn't understand that's a safety concern. I had a guy at a plant recently where we had jerky coming out, and it's a table of like 5 people, and this stuff is automatically a certain amount of spit out, and it got the distribution head there, it got stuck, and he stuck his hand up there to pull the jerky free so it'd keep working. This guy had been doing that as long as he'd been sitting there, and he had 5 people around him who could see him doing that. Well, he finally got his hand cut and chewed up in there. And the other people had an opportunity to talk to him, to let him know that was unsafe, and he shouldn't be doing that. And you'd be surprised what peer pressure does in a work environment. But they never did it. They never communicated to him. They never told him. And then, a lot of these things aren't if you're going to get hurt. It's when you're going to get hurt. It's just it's a matter of time. Could be tomorrow, could be 10 years from now, but it's going to happen. Grinders, man, oh man. They've got guards for a reason, top and bottom. It's rare that the first time I walk into a shop, I see both the top and the bottom guard actually in place. Sometimes that bottom one is there, but rarely are they both in place. And that grinders is just peeling out. There's a right way to use it and a wrong way to use it. And this is another thing. You see somebody using it wrong, you need to take a minute and instruct them how to do it. And if it's you doing it yourself, never remove the guard. Be careful with gloves because those are in-running. That's a in-running nip type of situation with the pinch point. Use something else to hold the part that you are grinding on. I don't know how many times I've seen somebody try to hold a piece and this thing's spinning at, I don't know how many 100,000 RPM. But it catches it and that part goes flying. And then your hand that you were pushing on goes in and you give yourself a nice little abrasion from that. These tools, if you're not using them correctly, everything we've got could cause significant damage. They really make the job 1,000 times easier than sitting there with a file, but you've got to treat them with respect and safely. I know I'm running out of time here. Temperatures are always an issue around parts that heat up. A lot of times we're not aware that something is hot. If something is normally hot, if at a minimum, you should have some signage there. Where we have hazards, we need to communicate them. so that somebody just doesn't inadvertently stick a hand somewhere where we've got a hot pipe, a steam pipe or something, or a part on a motor or type of machinery that typically heats up during use. Bites and stings, on or off the job, you want to treat the wound accordingly. Probably and I'm going to just power through a couple of these, but interestingly enough, the most expensive comp clean I had at one of my plants last year was a individual who got a cut, almost like a paper cut on their finger, and didn't report it, didn't properly clean it. It developed sepsis, which is poisoning, blood poisoning. Went into septic shock. They were in the hospital for like a week. Had to have that finger sliced open because of the swelling. Had a lot of tendon issues. It's been like a year, and they're finally getting back to full duty from the simplest injury, the most minor injury that occurred that year. So again, you protecting yourself, you get a cut, particularly in the work environment. There's a lot of other stuff going on in there. You want to make sure that you treat it, that you wash it, that you clean it, and then you protect it from, it's now a route of entry for any type of germs, that you protect it while you're working. Equipment, pretty obvious. Use taglines, keep out of the line of fire, never stand underneath a load, right? And these type of situations are huge line of fire and pinch points. Jewelry, that person's finger that's now minus the skin is what we call a degloving. When I first started working at the shipyard, I had that happen to one of the workers there, and my ring went off my finger and never went back on in the work environment. That's the other guy, his ring circle there. That's a direct result from having your ring in a work environment. We talked about PPE, right PPE for the right job, though. You put on cotton gloves. They're not the same as Kevlar. They're not going to protect you from. They're not cut proof, right? You have a rubber glove is not going to protect you the same as a nitrile glove. These all have a purpose. So it's important that you're using the correct one, and that you take care of any piece of equipment, safety equipment that you're using. Clean your hands. I know we're running out of time, and I'm sorry for running over.
You're good. We'd like to hear your information.
Okay. First aids, you need to have first aid provisions available for cuts to be able to clean them. A plan if something happens, for burns, for strains and sprains. We haven't spent much time talking about that, but strains and sprains, the number one thing we can do on those is when you get sore from doing something repetitive, you need to report it, because we have an opportunity to keep that from becoming tendonitis, to keep that from becoming a trigger finger or other type of issues with swelling and muscle and tendon swelling that ends up with a lot of pain and takes a long time to go away if you let it turn into something like tendonitis, right? So That's where administrative controls like rotating, don't put somebody on a job, or don't start a job yourself that's got all this got a repetitive motion aspect to it, and work 8 hours. You're just asking for that person to develop sore and swollen hands or forearms. I know when I do any kind of job where I need to do a bunch of mousing, if I don't have my mouse pad that's got the support for my wrist on it, man, my forearm after about an hour is just screaming. Um, and that's pretty wimpy stuff. So imagine, somebody out on the job that's using a lot of pressure to continually do something. It affects you, and it affects you quickly. Early intervention on any of those strains and sprains is the key. Icing, anti-inflammatory. It hurts when I do this. Don't do this. Um, this is a lot easier said than done if you're the only person out there doing that. But once you have tendonitis, you're not doing anything. You're just, it hurts too much to move that arm, and now it's going to take 30 days, and it's going to take therapy, and it's going to take cortisone shots for this to go away, and now you're susceptible to having it again. So early intervention is the key for any of those types. A little simple stretching, before you do tasks, taking a time out to just move your fingers and stretch your muscles, and spend a few seconds doing that before and after you finish doing it are very, very beneficial. And yeah, could be you. I have more in my career. I've had more issues with hand injuries than all the other ones probably combined. So protect yourself, think before you reach, keep your hands out of the line of fire, keep them out of pinch points, wear gloves where you can just to protect your skin and everything else. And I don't do anything without a pair of gloves on. And I appreciate everybody's attention and time this morning. So thank you very much.
All right, Doug, if you would go ahead and stop share.
There we go.
All right, thank you. All right, Doug, man, a whole lot of just packed information that you gave us here today. I would say, unfortunately, we probably all know somebody that's got, that nubby finger, whether they're a woodworker, whether they're, working around equipment in a plant. And too often in the past, we've just let that slide. It's like, that's the way it is. I think sometimes people's mentality is, you know what, it's just a hazardous job and I just have to deal with it. And we just have to change that mindset. So, you gave us a lot of really great information today, so that we can really take a focus on, like you said earlier, assessing the hazard first. And then when you can't engineer it out, hey, you've got PPE to do it. So thank you for those things. I've got a few questions here because we certainly do want to answer some questions. We had one early on. So do you have any recommendations on safety using a knife or a box cutter when working with live animals? Do you have any
Ooh.
recommendations on things they could use?
Oh, yeah, and what that's an awesome question, because I've been around cows a few times with Cargill at dairies and at other locations, and that insane amount of energy and force that goes from 0 to 60 can certainly change what you thought you were going to be doing. I mean, you're probably you're probably your best bet. Unfortunately, it is going to be something with a very significant spring loading, um, and you're not going to move that using your thumb. You're not going to expose that blade right until the last second that you need it, and then you're going to get your thumb right off of it. Because the other safety knives that are for that are meant to be in contact with something. So it, in order for it to work, like I put the blade out, I put it on a box, I let go, I cut the box, and as soon as it is no longer in contact with the box, the blade flips back. I don't know that depending on what you're doing with that knife, that's going to work for you. Yeah.
Probably a
Um,
little dehorning or castration. I
right.
would say
Those
some of
things.
those out
So
there.
if you can't do that, then maybe you're wearing a cut-proof glove, right?
Yeah.
Cut-proof gloves have there's multiple levels of cut-proof, and they get better every year, and the Kevlar ones that are at the lower level um, are not bulky. They're very easy to use. You can put a nitrile glove over them, if you want. So they don't get in your way. They don't mess up your dexterity. But from something simple like a knife type of deal, they'll more than protect you. So in some cases, maybe we have to go to that. Uh, I've gone to sleeves too, Kevlar sleeves for areas where your forearms are exposed also.
Okay. Thank you. Hope that helped answer your question there. And again, yeah, when it's not just a moving part that's continuously doing the same, like in a plant or something, that the same movement's happening, animals are unpredictable. So, be
Yeah, we're not
prepared for
engineering.
their
We don't
movement.
have they don't have the opportunity to engineer a lot of those specific tasks
That
out.
that kick out of them. Um, So I'm not exactly sure, so I might need some clarification. So there was somebody that asked about deburring pipes.
Deburring pipes, maybe,
Burring pipes. So
right?
I'm not, and maybe that was more of a comment than a question.
Definitely, like any kind of metal, right, that's been cut or threaded. You see that a lot on threads. There's burrs that are left there that are sharp as hell and will cut your finger or your hand really easy. You're moving your hand across a piece of pipe and there's a burr there. Again, a reason why I've always got gloves on um, for that type of thing, especially when they come from the manufacturer, right? You get 1,000 pipes or 1,000 lengths of something that's been cut, and there's burrs on them. There's burrs on them. There's burrs on the corners. Anytime you're grinding something, again, great reason to be protecting your hands all the time.
Yes, yes. Um, uh, can you go into maybe a little more detail on, protecting oneself from the line of fire in their daily job?
Yeah,
What do
it
you
it
what do you
it
mean
just
with that?
happens. It just happens. You're exposed to that all day long, um, in so many different ways when you start thinking about it. Uh, anything from I'm taking a box off a shelf that's above me, and I think it weighs 10 pounds, but it weighs 50. And as soon as I get it off that shelf, I've got that box, I've got gravity, and then I've got me in my head, right? So I put myself in the line of fire. Um, and that happens all day long. I put my hand, typically we only do this one time. when we're younger, but I've got my hand on the door or in the door jamb and I leave it there. I put it in the line of fire if that door closes, right? So there's the line of fire, pinch points, kind of the same thing. You need to have situational awareness, and be thinking about when you're doing something, the what if, right? It's always the what if. I remember walking up on a guy one time who was cutting a 1 inch piece of pipe, and he had it sitting on his leg and was cutting like this. And I mean, you didn't need to be a certified safety professional to understand that when he gets through with the bottom of that, right, that's going to go into his leg.
Yeah.
So it's that situational awareness, aware of what you're doing, aware of what's around you, and the situation that you're putting yourself into.
Exactly right. And you mentioned it earlier. It's using this noggin up here
Right.
before you start that job. That's why this is supposed to be that important organ for you, is you have the ability to think those things out. One other question came in. How can I identify pinch points better in everything that I'm doing?
Once you start looking for them, you'll see them, and you'll see them everywhere, from the drawer on your desk, to your car door, um, to holding a cart on the outside while you're moving it along a wall. You've got your hand out there. What we used to, we got these big racks of jerky, and they would grab them from the outside, moving them around, and tons of hand injuries, until we put these handles on the inside for them to grab, that was out of the line of fire, right? Away from those pinch points. There's a term, cognitive bias. And when you're younger on the job, you haven't seen what older workers have seen. They haven't seen somebody, catch their finger, in the door. They haven't seen the person who was cutting into themselves cut themselves open. So they're just not aware of the fact that this is an unsafe action, unsafe condition, because it hasn't happened to them, right? So they don't have that cognitive bias. So it's up to us, who've been around a little bit longer, to help them understand that, hey, what you're doing, you're going to get hurt, right? I've seen it before. They haven't, so it seems fine to them. Hey, I've done this a whole bunch of times. There's no problem here. It's a really fast way to do it. Yeah, until you take a 1 inch cut in your forearm, it was the fast way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Here at the end, we will, for about 5 minutes, Catherine will unmute everybody if there's a direct question you want to ask Doug, but we'll just do that for about 5 minutes so that we're conscious of Doug's time and everybody else's. Again, want to make a quick thank you to you, Doug. Great information. Somebody made a comment, on your slide that you had about degloving. Just a reminder, hey, you're wearing your wedding ring or you're wearing a ring, those things can get caught up. So thank you for that point out there. Went perfectly with what Doug talked about earlier. If you haven't seen them in the chat box, there are 2 certificates. It was put out there as a PDF, but here a little later on in the chat, it was put out there as a Word document, so maybe a little better editable for some people. And again, you can recognize your participation. If you're doing an event at your facility, make sure to go out to standupforgrainsafety.org and let us know what you did. We love to hear that people are doing their own focuses at their own facilities. Thank you for your participation today. And Hey, I do have to do a quick shout out to, hey, Glen Elder, Kansas. Thank you for logging in with us today, all my friends out there. So, Catherine, if you would want to go ahead and unmute anybody, if there's a direct question that anybody wants to ask to Doug, and we'll give it just 5 minutes here, and then we're going to call it a good day.
So anybody can unmute who wants to at this point, or you should be able to, or you can put your questions in chat. And in the meantime, I'll go ahead and post those certificates again.
And when anybody leaves today, when you leave and end the session, you will probably get a little quick survey, just 1 or 2 questions that will pop up. Please take those for us. We always love to hear more how we can do better, topics for next year. Keep a focus. So yeah, anybody who wants to ask Doug a question here, go ahead and unmute here for the next few minutes.
Yeah, and again, appreciation to all of the agencies, Central Valley Ag, that participate and do this. You know, our family farms just don't get the type of support, you know, that big ag does, or doesn't in some cases, but should. You know, and these associations really try from an outreach standpoint to make a difference and um, to help those family farms work safer, bring everybody back home at the end of the day the same way they started. So
That's right.
great job. Stand up for safety is been a huge thing each year. Great work, great effort.
And I see, I think Cynthia unmuted yourself. So if you have a question, go ahead and ask it. And I see Jared there was a lot of great resources. People have been popping up out there in the chat. So thank you. Just saw one for a retractable knife. So if
Yeah,
that's
there's
something
tons of
people
stuff.
want,
Yeah, there's
please take
tons
a
of
look.
stuff out there, you know, if you just spend
Yeah.
a few minutes researching it. I didn't mention this, but one workarounds are something that are a big enemy for us in safety. And that's, we have a hazard and we just work around it rather than eliminating it. You know, when it comes to like knives or some of those other things, we can eliminate a lot of those hazards by just getting the right piece of equipment. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of different stuff's available every year. So if you look 2 years ago and there wasn't anything there, it may be now.
Yeah. We did have a question pop in. So something you probably talked about in your first aid, but why can the amputated limb or finger not contact ice?
Well, one of the reasons is ice is a little bit too cold and it will burn and it will kill the cells at a real macro or micro level. So you don't want to put it on ice. You would want to wrap it. And then, you know, you put it in something like a washcloth or some gauze or something like that, and then sit it on the ice so it's not having direct contact. You want to eliminate that direct contact is what you want to do. And it's amazing what they can put back on. You know, I spent 15 years on a 911 ambulance and did a number of amputations. And just about every one of those was successfully reattached.
So again, with not, there was a post earlier, a great comment. Hey, don't go out and do all those kind of DIY things
Yep.
on the internet. Don't use those ticks. Sorry, tips and tricks that you see on TikTok. They're probably not in your best interest. But hey, maybe watching emergency 911 or Grey's Anatomy or something probably isn't the best way to get my first aid
No.
stuff. So yeah, ask an expert. Don't be watching the TV show to find it. So Okay, any other questions here about one more minute? And again, if any of those resources that were popped up out there in the chat, if you want to download those really quick, otherwise we will be ending here shortly. Any other questions from the gallery?
Yeah, thanks again for everybody for just attending. Um, you know, and if you pick up one thing, just think before you reach.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, it's pretty quiet out there. So we are going to call it a great day. Thanks again, Doug. Loved your information. Thanks for being a part of this today.
Thank you, Doug, very much. We
All right,
appreciate
Kat, thanks.
it. Okay, bye.
Thank you.